Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist who integrates both psychology and scripture studies to understand the Gospels and seek out new pastoral teachings for Christians in these modern times. Today's podcast is from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verse 1 to 9. This Gospel focuses on the earliest accounts of the resurrection of Jesus. The story starts with Mary of Magdala going to the tomb and finding it empty. She assumes that they have taken the body away, and she runs to tell the disciples. This seems like a regular assumption. Despite the fact that Jesus did preach about his death and resurrection, it would still be difficult to believe in the resurrection. There are a couple of points then that I want to raise with you. I wonder what it was like for the followers of Jesus during and after the crucifixion. They were likely devastated. Some of the disciples could be diagnosed with acute stress disorder. Checking with the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, acute stress disorder is defined as experiencing a traumatic event, or being a witness in person of a trauma of another. You may be more familiar with PTSD, also known as post-traumatic stress disorder. The symptoms of PTSD and acute stress disorder are almost identical. Acute stress disorder is diagnosed when the stressor happened within the last month or less. If the individual is still experiencing the stress symptoms after a month, the diagnosis is then changed to PTSD. We don't have any indication of what symptoms they were experiencing, but likely the disciples were in shock at what they had witnessed. Their dreams, hopes, and expectations gone. Likely some were questioning their faith. Others may have felt tricked, or just did not know what to make of the last 2 days. Their way of life was ripped away. Emil Durkheim, a pioneer sociologist, developed the theory of anomie. Anomie is a state by which one's expectations are unclear and their social system that keeps them functioning has broken down. He believed that anomie, or normlessness, could result in feelings of deep despair and worthlessness for individuals. I wonder if the disciples were perhaps tempted to simply go home and to view the last 3 years as an experience they wanted to forget. It seems, however, that the followers gathered in groups to support one another and to look at their future. They were probably at the limit of their resolve. Into this comes Mary of Magdala with the claim that the body had been stolen. Now, I suspect that for some disciples, this news would have prompted them to ask the question, what's next? Peter and the beloved disciple John run to investigate. I am surprised that more disciples did not go. I'm not sure if their hesitancy to follow Peter and John were based on the painful experience they had just lived, or perhaps they were not interested in going to see an empty tomb. I don't think anyone was expecting the resurrection, even though Jesus had spoke about his death several times. Peter and the beloved disciple John run to investigate. This is amazing, as it is very unusual for an adult male to run in this culture. The only other place in Scripture that I read this is in the story of the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15, verse 11 to 32. John, being the youngest, is faster than Peter and reaches the tomb first. Out of respect for Peter's position as leader, John allows him to enter first. Or maybe John was simply frightened to do so. Peter goes into the tomb and noticing the manner that the burial cloths are laid, and immediately senses that this is not a grave robbery. Peter and John started to believe, even though, as Scripture says, they did not yet understand. I want to draw your attention to the fact that the early days of Christianity were ones of chaos and despair. Early Christians had to deal with the persecutions, and many ended up martyrs. Our spiritual ancestors did not have it easy. Mistakes were made, events didn't always turn out the way they were intended, and everyone had their faith struggles. So we ought not to be surprised when we also experience lack of faith, misunderstandings, and even despair. These experiences don't necessarily mean that we're doing something wrong. I'm realizing more and more how important and necessary resilience is for our faith to develop roots. There are many other accounts of the first days after the resurrection, each with a different focus on faith, and a call to live the faith. Please note that the first experiences of the resurrection were very subtle. No miracles, teachings, or anything extraordinary. The beginning stages of faith are often unnoticed. Peter and John are able to believe because they have the eyes of faith. That is, an attentiveness to the workings of the Spirit. Thank you for listening. I invite you to join me next week when I examine the Gospel of John, who describes important appearances of Jesus and the story of the conversion of Thomas, one of the disciples. If this is the first time you have heard my podcast and you're interested in hearing more, I urge you to listen to my podcast listed on the website. Every Sunday, I release a new podcast focusing on the gospel for the following week. I invite you to listen to all the podcasts, and I hope the reflections are useful to you. The link is https://psychologist_looks_at_scripture.buzzsprout.com. If you have any questions or concerns, I can be reached by email at peter.doherty@gmail.com. That's peter.dohertyomi@gmail.com. Just also a reminder of the retreats starting this Thursday. You will see two preparation podcasts to help you prepare. I also, as I close, like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Richard Coulomb, who serves as a reviewer and checks my grammar for this podcast. And thank you, Richard, for your help. I wish you all a blessed Easter season, and take care.